Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work, and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Welcome to this episode of the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show. In this episode, we're talking about relationships, and at the time of recording, we're over 50 days into COVID-19. And during a crisis, our relationships become even more important. Our connection to our loved ones are what buffer us against the storm outside. But the challenge is that coronavirus is likely to be threatening our relationships too. It's changing the dynamics of how we live and relate to each other just when we need them the most. Maybe lockdown has pushed us into an unprecedented situation where we're now living and working together 24/7. Maybe your partner's life is carrying on relatively as normal, but yours has been turned upside down, and that disparity is difficult. Maybe the increase in difficult emotions is playing out inside your home in unhelpful ways. Whatever the situation, it's natural that the current crisis is putting our relationships under new and challenging pressure. Thankfully, there are strategies that we can call upon to make it through this difficult time with our relationships intact and maybe even strengthened. That's why I'm delighted to introduce my guest, Ian Tomlinson. Ian is the therapist and director of the Affinity Centre, and Ian spends most of his time working with couples. He helps transform their relationships so that each person can get their needs met and create healthy patterns of relating to each other. While this episode is being recorded during COVID-19, the insights can be applied at any time to strengthen our relationship. In this episode, Ian shares why the traditional approach to couples therapy doesn't always work and how his approach is different. He also shared that really when we become parents, children fundamentally change our relationship. And he shared a statistic that 68% of couples feel that they're having children negatively impact their relationship. So it was useful to know that we're not alone if our relationship has struggled since we become parents. He also shared that it's normal to hit difficulties in relationships, and that actually that's supposed to happen, and that if we get stuck, that stuckness is just growth trying to happen in our relationship. He also shared the phases that we go through and the particular phase where we tend to get stuck. He also shared 4 behaviours that can predict the end of a relationship. But ultimately, what he gave us in this episode was some strategies how we can feel closer and more connected to have a conscious and joyful relationship. So I can't wait for you to hear the insights that Ian shares. So let's dive in. So welcome, Ian. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Hi, you're welcome.
For those that don't know about you and your work, could you share an insight into what you do and how you came to do it, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a psychotherapist and I work with individuals, and I guess I'm a couples specialist. I've trained for many years to work with couples. I direct the Affinity Centre. That's a therapy centre, and we've got branches in both Wilmslow and Cheadle. And I am a member of the International Institute for Training in Imago, which is a big mouthful. And really, basically, what that's about is training other therapists to work with couples. And I guess that's a really important part of the role that I play, because for me, working with couples is very important. It's important work. And the more therapists we can have out there properly trained to do that, the better, really. So that's
so Imago is kind of the framework. Would that be the right term to use, or the process that you use?
Sure. Imago relationship therapy is one modality of couples therapy. I guess it's a way of working with couples. How it might differ from what you imagine couples therapy to be like. If anybody sees couples therapy on telly, there was always like the couple sitting on the sofa and the therapist sitting in front of them, and they tend to both talk to the therapist, and it's a bit like the therapist is some kind of judge as to who's right and who's wrong. We don't do any of that in Imago relationship therapy. We believe that work should be done between the couple So I always say to my couples, my job is to make myself unemployed as quickly as possible. My job is to teach and guide the couple into shifting their relationship and doing things differently in their relationship so they don't need me. Because ultimately, I'm not going to be there sitting in your house when you're having an argument. You need to learn to do that differently.
I love that. Yeah, it sounds amazing.
Very, very different. And I guess it's from a belief. The other aspect that I really love, I mean, it's based on work by Harville Hendricks and Helena Kelly Hunt. It's based on the principle that relationships are about joy. So we're talking about the joy of relationships and how that sometimes gets covered up by all of the crap that sometimes, that builds up naturally. And so my job is to support and to a certain extent educate couples into how they can do this differently and why they get stuck, because actually we all get stuck in relationships. It's normal.
Yeah. And it's almost a taboo subject, I think. Not many people will share openly. They might have their very, very, very close kind of trusted network that they share it with, but it's not something that is spoken about a lot. And that's why I felt it's so important to do at the moment, because as you say, relationships are difficult at the best of times. And I think for my community, when parenthood gets put into that mix, it becomes difficult. But at the time of recording this, obviously we're in COVID. And so there's that increased dynamic and potential pressure.
Absolutely. I mean, children in relationships is a bit like a bomb going off. I think just picking some statistics out of the air from what I can remember, it's about 68% of all couples feel that having children is negatively impacts their relationship with each other. And of course it does, because you've got this small human being who demands attention. So you have to give that, you have to look after your kids, you have to pay attention to them. And so it's really easy to start losing connection with each other once you have kids.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, at the time of recording this, there are some key challenges for couples, some of which might be, regardless of whether it was COVID or not. But what do you see in your practice as some of the challenges for couples at the moment?
Well, it's a really interesting time, I guess. That's one way of describing it at the moment. It's difficult. And, couples are spending lots of time together. They're used to having, most couples are used to having space, either one or both of them going out to work. Some couples have got challenged with money issues. You've got your kids at home, and that's difficult. You've got bored kids at home. And if you're trying to work from home as well with bored kids, that's a nightmare. And you don't have your normal family and friend networks available because you can't go and see them.
Yeah.
So, the pressures are on for lots of couples, I think, at the moment. It's not necessarily an easy time.
No, not at all. And I speak to my clients, and I've got clients that their husbands have been furloughed, so they're actually off at home and they're trying to do the homeschooling, yet they're trying to work full time. So it's shifted the dynamic. Because then, it's taking co-parenting and managing the domestic load in a different way. Sure. People are having to kind of manage a whole new dynamic on top of a dynamic that may have already been challenged anyway. And, they've got heightened emotions, so they're trying to navigate it, and they probably don't feel as resourced. And as you say, they may not have been educated in how to do this properly, because I don't think any of us are. So that's why I can't wait to dive into more about how you work with couples, because I think that's going to be so valuable for anybody listening.
Yeah, it's I guess what it has done, these current times have exacerbated problems that may already have been there. That's one of the things that I'm seeing in my office. It's not really, it's on online now, because I'm working with couples online. But if they were struggling before, they tend to be struggling even more at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, though, I'll say to you, Nikki, I've also had couples that the opposite has happened.
Yes.
They're doing better because they're spending more time together.
Yeah.
They're not having the pressure from work. They're having more together time. They're having leisure time together. They're able to go out for walks together. So for some people, it's actually done the opposite. And often, I guess one of the common themes for these people is, for whatever reason, they're financially secure.
Yeah.
So it's not been bad for everyone. Some people have actually really liked it, as you know, and it's benefited their relationship. So there's two sides to this, but absolutely, it has put pressure in places where there has already been pressure in relationships.
And it's interesting you should share that, Ian, because I went out onto my Facebook community for Wisdom for Working Mums earlier this week and said, can I just kind of get a sense on, do you feel that the current situation has improved or had a negative impact? And the people that responded said that it had a positive impact, which I think they're more willing to share it. The people that there might be more that had a negative but didn't feel so comfortable sharing it. And I thought, as you say, that's really interesting and reassuring to know as well that it's impacted us all in different ways, and as with all these things, it goes across the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. You know, when we're struggling in our relationships, we tend not to broadcast it.
Yeah. And that's why I think this will be so important for people to listen, because I think there's often a lot of shame attached to not doing well in your relationships and not being able to voice it or know how to fix it. So I think some of the stuff you're going to share will be soothing to those that might be struggling.
Let's hope so.
So in terms of what challenges you see when people turn up at your practice, whether it's virtually or face to face, what are some of the normal experiences that couples come to you for?
I could give you a really long list. I think people come to couples therapy for all sorts of different reasons. You don't have to come to couples therapy because you have a problem in your relationship. It may be, some couples do come because they want to get closer.
Yeah.
But typically, we tend not to enter couples therapy to improve our relationships. We tend to come to couples therapy when we feel really stuck. And again, a bit of research has shown that we ordinarily wait up to 6 years before we actually get into couples therapy, from the point at which we actually needed it.
Wow.
So that's a hell of a long time to wait, isn't it? To be stuck and struggling. If you equate that to a physical, can you imagine breaking your leg and saying, well, it'll be all right. We'll just ignore it. It might go away. And then, 6 years later, going to the doctor saying, do you know what? It really hurts. I need something to do about this.
Yeah. And it's not just my leg now, but I've got the third pain in my shoulder and here.
Absolutely.
And
my back's broken.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really interesting statistic. So for anybody listening that goes, I'm struggling at the moment, or I was struggling before this, but I'm struggling even more. What advice can you share for anyone listening, how they can create a more positive relationship with their partner?
Well, I think we start with the idea that it's normal to get stuck in relationships. I think that's really important to understand. This is normal. It's supposed to happen, if you like. That's how we see it from an Imago perspective. The stuckness is growth trying to happen in your relationship.
I love that.
In Imago, we call it the power struggle phase of the relationship. So we all enter the power struggle phase, whether we like it or not. That first part of the relationship, that we call the first part of the relationship the romantic phase. So, when you first fall in love, can you remember, Vicky, when you first met your partner, it was all amazing, wasn't it? Oh, he was perfect. You were your best you. He was his best him. And, you really tuned into each other. You had all of those hormones going round your blood system that naturally get released. And that's what happens in the romantic phase of the relationship. You literally fall in love. unfortunately, we cannot sustain that as human beings. It's impossible, nor do we need to from a reproductive place, because ultimately that's there to get you to mate and have offspring. So it serves a purpose, but it's not maintainable. And then what happens in relationships is we tend to enter that power struggle phase of the relationship. And we flick from the what can I do for you phase to what can you do for me? Why aren't you meeting my needs? And that's really, it's at that point when couples have done that for a while. Sometimes they've done it for a year. Sometimes they've done it for 30 years. It's there that they come into therapy and want some help and support.
Yeah.
Makes
I love
sense.
how you framed that. Yes. Yeah. And
familiar.
I think, and I'm imagining, I'm sitting here nodding along. I know people can't see me, but going, yes. And I've been with my husband for 25 years. And, and I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, I can kind of see that. And I'm hoping and I'm imagining that other people listening to this will be doing the same. So what can you do then when you get into that power struggle phase? Because I'm imagining there's things we can do to navigate it with more ease, and there's things we can do that make it a lot more difficult.
Absolutely. And the work that I do with couples is really about helping them move from an unconscious relationship. When we're in the power struggle phase, we just do things unconsciously. We do the things that we learned to do when we were kids to survive, basically. Yeah. They're not very useful strategies when we're an adult. They will have been useful to you as a kid to get through the difficulties and the challenges that you had as a child. But when we bring our child-learned behaviours into our adult relationships, it tends to throw a bit of spanner into the works. So my job with a couple is to help them have a far more conscious, deliberate relationship. So they're paying attention. They learn to pay attention to the relationship and take care of the relationship rather than focusing on their own needs.
Yeah. So it's almost like a separate identity to them. So there's the individuals and then there's this identity of the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a relational paradigm rather than an individual paradigm. When we just put ourselves first and try to get our own needs met, that can often be at the expense of our partner who has their needs. This is about how can you focus on the needs of the relationship. And weirdly, as you focus on the needs of the relationship, you get your own needs met anyway. So it's a different way around you get the same result. Hopefully you get a closer, more connected relationship and you experience the joy of being in relationship rather than just experiencing the struggle of trying to bully, manipulate, cajole your partner into doing the things that you want them to do.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. So clearly you've got a huge amount of experience and have been doing this for many years and have a process that you will use when you're working with your clients. If somebody listening is going, oh my gosh, this sounds just what I need.
Yeah.
Obviously, they can contact you to talk about having some support. And I know we're going to give out details of how people can find out more about you at the end.
Yeah.
But if we assume that not everybody, and you're not going to have enough room in your practice for everybody that potentially needs it, what strategies can people look at trying themselves that might make a difference in this current climate?
Yeah, okay. I think this is about learning to be the best partner rather than expect to find the best partner. So an important part of this is to start taking responsibility for your own behaviour. And that is a key part in this. Couples who are struggling often exhibit particular characteristics and behave in particular ways. And there's a guy called John Gottman in the States who's a psychologist. Have you heard of John Gottman, Nikki?
Yes, yeah, very much so, yeah.
Yeah, so John Gottman gives he talks about the 4 horsemen of divorce. And these are really useful things to take a note of and look at how you can shift these behaviours. So the first horseman of divorce would be criticism, criticising your partner. The second would be showing contempt to your partner. The third one is stonewalling. That's where you just basically shut down and say nothing and remove yourself. And the final horseman is defensiveness. And so if you want to shift your relationship, you can spot these behaviors in yourself and do things differently. So rather than criticize your partner, it's okay to complain, but criticism does real harm to the relationship. I guess the difference is that when you criticize someone, you're talking about them, their very being. Whereas when you complain, you're talking about a behavior. Get the difference?
Absolutely. So rather than saying, you're annoying, it's when you do that, I find it annoying.
Yeah. So instead of saying, you've left the washing up to me again, you're a lazy pig.
Yeah.
You say, I feel really frustrated that you haven't washed up and I'd really like you to do that. One's complaining, the other's criticising. There's not much you can do about being called a lazy pig.
Yeah.
But there is something you can do about your partner requesting you to do the washing up.
Yeah. Love it.
Contempt is a really nasty one, and it's a real, if I see a couple who are contemptuous of each other, I do worry about how their relationship will sort itself out if they're not willing to stop that behavior. So when you're contemptuous of your partner, you're going to be, you usually come from a one-up position, and it's usually putting them down and treating them like they're worthless or they're stupid, or that whole, there's a real nasty vibe to it.
Yeah.
And get a sense of that. I'm sure you're probably getting that bit.
Yeah, and I think that's, just the very small piece that you've given on that, I can imagine kind of the behaviours.
It's really a really erosive behaviour towards the relationship. So instead of that, I'd really be encouraging a couple to move to appreciations, a culture of appreciation in the relationship. And in Imago Relationship Therapy, we talk about appreciations a lot. How can you tell your partner the things that you love about them? So the homework that I'll give all couples when they first come and see me is to tell their partner at least one thing every day that they love about them, or that they appreciate that they've done for them that day. It doesn't matter how big or small it is, but just getting into a habit of saying, I don't know, did the gardening today and it looks brilliant. I really appreciate the effort you put in there. Or, I love your eyes, or whatever it is. And strange as it may sound, that those small shifts in the dynamic of the relationship make huge, huge shifts in the feel of the relationship.
Yeah. And I'm imagining almost like a bank account. You're topping up your relationship bank account that you can weather the storm a bit more when you've filled it up.
That's exactly it. It actually rewires your brain. The neurons in your brain start to shift. So rather than seeing your partner as a threat, if you're used to hearing appreciations from your partner, they are more likely to see you, and you are more likely to see them as a positive, loving person.
And wasn't it John Gottman that his research was he could listen to a couple, and by the amount of appreciation he could determine the probability of divorce or not? Have I got that wrong?
I think you got it absolutely right. John Gottman uses these 4 horsemen to decide. I think he says he can do it within 2 minutes of hearing a conversation, whether they're going to stick together or not. And he has a stupidly high percentage of accuracy to predict that.
Wow.
So,
and does it have? Am I right in saying that there's a I can't remember what the word I'm looking for. There's like a percentage of appreciation versus the four horsemen that is a predictor of positive relationships.
Well, the research that Gottman did showed, I mean, what Gottman did, he is a researcher. He spent 20, 30 years in universities researching relationships. And what he did was ask couples who've had long-term relationships, 20, 30 years plus together. He monitored how they interacted with each other. And he found that for every one negative interaction, there were 20 positives. And even when they were struggling, even when they were arguing, for every one negative, there were 5 positives.
Wow.
And just, compare that to how often you give your partner an appreciation. One thing, every day saying, I really love this about you. I really appreciate that you did that for me. Or that really shifts things. It makes a massive difference.
Thank you, because that sounds, such a simple thing, but it's also sounds like it can have a profound impact. So I'm hearing that, a piece of homework that people would do if they came to work with you, but that they could do if listening to this, is just get into that habit of focusing on one thing every day, or at least one thing every day that they can appreciate.
Absolutely. And it's dead easy to do. You can tell them directly, you can text it, you can email them, however, but just getting into the habit of telling your partner the things that you love about them. That's relationally transformational. And in Imago relationship therapy, there's the work. Often couples come to me and believe that the work is to dig through the difficult stuff and figure out the difficult stuff. Well, that is important. And we have a really structured way of doing that, which is called Imago, the Imago dialogue process, which allows you to do that in an emotionally safe way with each other. But the easiest way, the most important stuff, is putting energy into the positive aspects of your relationship, telling your partner the things that you love about them, demonstrating that, simple behaviors, listening to them, paying attention to them. All of that is relatively easy to do.
Mm. Yeah. And relatively, and I think the difficulty is that probably a lot of us don't do it, but actually to just try the practice, even if we're not feeling it to begin with, I'm imagining it starts this cascade.
Well, we get out of the habit of doing it. If you read Harville's book, Harville Hendricks, who's the originator of Imago relationship therapy, if you read the Getting the Love You Want book, which is probably one of the best books you can read, if you want to know about how relationships work, both the theory and what to do about shifting your relationship, the Getting the Love You Want book, which I think he revised it last year with his wife, Helen Kelly Hunt. In there, it gives you exercises to do, and one of them is appreciations, even if you don't feel like it. And what happens is, before you know it, the dynamic of your relationship shifting, and then you do feel like doing it. So it's back to the neural pathways in your brain. If you're being positive and loving towards your partner, even if you're pretending, after a while, it feels like, actually, I'm getting something out of this, the stimulation, and you start to reconnect. And actually, that's what we want as human beings. We want connection with our partner.
Yeah. Thank you, Ian. Because one of the things that I'm conscious of with these podcasts anyway is that working mums tend to be overwhelmed, and more so in the current climate. But that feels a really doable, simple strategy that's, can cut through, the complexity of relationships. So I really appreciate you sharing that. So if there's just one thing that you hope a working mum who's listening to this takes away, what would that be?
I would say, remember that your partner isn't you. They're not you. You know, it's a shock, but your partner isn't you. They're different. So it's okay to have those differences. It's okay to have differences of opinion and think differently. And I think what happens in the power struggle phase is that we start to believe that our partner knows us really well and that they can read our minds. And actually, we haven't evolved that skill yet as human beings.
Yes.
So a lot of the stuff that I will be teaching couples helps them move around this idea that they're the same person. And we call it differentiation. It's moving to differentiate the two people and realize that your partner is separate to you, and that's okay. In fact, that's a joyful thing.
Yeah, and I think that's really powerful, because I've had many conversations with my girlfriends about how we actually expect our partners not only to be the perfect partner, but we're actually judging them on standards of being the perfect woman.
Yeah.
not who they are.
They have no chance today.
Yes, exactly.
They're set up for failure.
Yeah, because we can't even meet that standard. So I think that's really, really useful to hear that they're not us. We differentiate that and see them for, and appreciate them for what they do bring to the relationship.
Yeah, and I think that adds to the whole essence of Omega relationship therapy is getting curious about each other. So if your partner isn't you, who are they then? What do they want? Getting curious about that, and the dialogue structure that we use in the therapy gives each partner a way of finding out about each other in a safe way. And by doing that, start to getting a deeper understanding of where you're coming from, and also why you want certain things in the relationship to happen in a particular way, because that'll all be attached to your childhood stuff. So it's about slowing down and paying attention, checking that your partner's available to have a conversation in the first place, and listening to each other.
Yeah. Thank you, Ian. I think that's what you've shared has been really profound. So how can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, there are a number of different places. You can find me on iantomlinson.co.uk. So that's my own personal website. And I've written a fair few blog posts on there about relationships. So by all means, go on there and have a read of some of the stuff. If you want the Affinity Centre, if you want any help and support with relationships, we've got affinitycentre.co.uk, and that includes the couples workshops that we do. We do weekend workshops for couples, which is 2 days of just working out why we get stuck in relationships and how you could unstick yourself and move towards a more, a close, more connected, loving relationship. That's actually the Getting the Love You Want workshop, which is it's an internationally delivered workshop. We deliver it in Manchester. It's the first place outside of London that you can do this. So that's all of that information's on the affinitycentre.co.uk. And recently we've just started relationful.com. So you can follow us on Instagram at relationful. And that website is really looking about how you can have a better relationship with yourself and with other people, including your partner. And we're developing a series of online courses that you can do in your own time. Some of them are geared to self-development. Some are geared towards development of your relationship. So you do them with your partner, but you don't have the pressure of having to turn up or have therapy or any of that. You can do them at your own speed. So there's lots of places. And by all means, email me too if there's any way that I can help you. It's just ian@affinitycentre.co.uk.
Brilliant. And I'll put all the links into the show notes so people can access it through there as well. And it just leaves me to say thank you, Ian. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise and wisdom with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, Nikki.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.